Good. Thank you, Sue, for that introduction. Safeguarding our local water resources is pretty difficult, but some of them are very good still and happy, but they have their moments. On the left is the River Shep, and on the right is the River Granter. The Granter had a bad time in 2019, and I'll tell you a bit more about that and why it happened. Recently, talking to some children from Extinction Rebellion, in fact, they said they'd never seen a good chalk stream. So here's one for you to look at. This actually isn't in Cambridgeshire, it's a bit bigger than any of ours, and it's the Nar in Norfolk. Roughly what I want to go through this evening are these things. Where does our water come from? Why is it special? What has changed to threaten our water resources? And when is it going to be shorter and shorter in supply? There are some inconvenient truths about water resources that you need to know, and all of us need to start thinking outside the box as to how we can put it right. That's really a summary of what we need to do. Okay, so let's go back to Tudor and Stuart, Cambridge. And some of you will recognize immediately where Trinity and King's and Clare and so on are beside the river. The river then was probably much cleaner than it is now, but was also beginning to be a sewer. And the Vikings, when they lived in Cambridge in the 9th century or thereabouts, dug the ditch, which goes right around the outside from King's Mill, where the anchor is, right round the city, if you can see my mouse, round past many of the colleges and back into the Cam at Jesus. So there was a town sewer, and it was flushed by water at a higher level at the King's Mill. Now, water then was brought to Trinity in a pipe from the Conduit Head. But as you all know, later, there was another water supply which Thomas Hobson put in from 9 wells, taking water north from near Addenbrooke's Hospital up to the city. And this ended as a fountain in the market square. But that system didn't last forever. And soon enough, before long, we needed to move on to another system of supply, which was to take water not from a chalk spring, but out of the ground with a pump from Cherry Hinton. So here is a little bit of potted history on the Cambridge Water Company. The pumping station at Cherry Hinton dates back to about 1855, and the Cambridge Water Company have a webpage which tells you all about its history. And that did pretty well until the 1890s when they moved to Fulbourn, and that did pretty well until the wetlands there began to dry up, and then they moved up to the Fleam Dyke and put in a much bigger pumping station in 1921. Now that supply of water was enough for the whole, well, the whole of the local region and probably half the old county of Cambs and the Isle of Ely, with all their water needs until about 1950. So what we do then is to go and take water from more chalk sources up and down. Now, this is the Cambridge chalk, and it's got on it our main rivers. Let me just show you where they are. This is the Granter. Can you see the mouse? This is the Cam. This is the Ree. Here's the Little Bourne Brook that comes in off the clay. They all meet at Barron's Pool and go through the city, and then they're joined by the Loads further to the north. And that's pretty much the end of our little river, the Cam, because it joins the Old West just before Ely, as you know. The contemporary boreholes which bring all our water are those places which have little rings around them here, which are nitrate protection zones to make sure that we get the very best water. We do have a wonderful water supply. That is an important thing to know. But people have realized for many, many years that not everything is going to last forever. Sustainability may seem a relatively new concept, but people have been worried about this for a long time. I have a copy of the 1965 Cambridge BA meeting in which Colin Forbes voices his uncertainty about the sustainability of our system. Hobson's conduit, as you know, failed in the 1970s for the first time, probably since the Ice Age. Then Gro Brundtland warns us about sustainable development and our common future and all the implications of that in the 80s. The British Geological Survey warned again, and then the EC Water Directive came in telling us to improve our water courses, etc. And now the Environment Agency tells us that things are bad. So let's quickly look at the chalk. The pale lime green is the chalk. You all know roughly where it is, and it's something familiar, I think, to many of you. The chalk governs the chemical nature, the physical flow, and the biological character of our streams. You can't see the chalk very well in Cambridge. You used to get a good view of it in the Barrington Pit. But if you go down to Sussex on the coast, you can certainly see what wonderful stuff it is. And our chalk is not greatly different from this. It's calcareous, porous, fractured, lets the rain in, and holds quite a lot of water. If we take a look at that chalk again, running from the southwest to the northeast across the southeast of Britain, there are lots of chalk streams. England has 85% of Europe's chalk streams. That's really a great gift and a great responsibility. They are also pretty special to our area of Britain. We don't have tropical rainforests, but we do have something that could be almost as beautiful and lovely, and we need to look after it. If you look at the current flows of those streams, you will see that they are not good either. If you want to find Cambridge, you just go to that little bump in the wash and go down and go to this little bump on the coast and go across, and you get to our patch. And there you will see that our chalk stream flows are below the environmental limits set by the Environment Agency for us to comply with the Water Framework Directive. We're in a bad place. So let's look at how all this networks together. The rain, as you know, comes down from the heavens, and where there is chalk, it can percolate through. It can spend a long time going through or a short time, but eventually it comes down to a hard base rock. And at that point, it comes out as a spring. That spring water is clear, is calcium rich, and it's at a pretty constant temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius. It's a very special environment. The fauna and flora of the chalk streams are, again, I think something absolutely wonderful. Some of you will know the arrowhead, top left on the, you might have seen on the upper river. It's not as common as it used to be by any means. The banded demoiselle, Calopteryx splendens, certainly looks after it, lives up to its name. It's the most wonderful looking insect. The trout and the little water crowfoot there at the bottom right is a very good indicator of good chalk water, and is the place where it's the larval food plant really of the damselflies. Very important ecologically. Quick return to your geography classroom, and you will see here the significant facts about evapotranspiration and evaporation in the ecosystem. And the groundwater recharge can only happen by percolation through from the surface. But that evapotranspiration is very powerful in the summer, and therefore it's pretty much only the winter rainfall which goes through to feed our rivers. That is not a lot of water compared to the total rainfall, as I will show you later. The other little difficulty we have is that we're in a dry place. There is some competition between Streatham, which is about here, just short of Ely, and Clacton-on-Sea as to be the driest places in Britain. I don't know which of them is winning at the moment, but we are in a very dry place. Less than 600 millimeters of rain per annum, and our mean Cambridge rainfall is only about 550. We are actually in a water-stressed region comparable to Spain or Morocco. We don't have a lot of water to spare. So where I turned next was to look at the rainfall. Is the rainfall or changes in the rainfall the problem that we have? The last 60 years of data from the University Botanic Garden allows you to look at the annual rainfall total, which is in blue, and the winter rainfall, which is in red. That summer rainfall is almost all transpired by plants. We don't keep it in the groundwater. What groundwater we have comes from that winter rainfall. It is variable. There's a lot of variance, as we describe it, between one year and another. Unusually variable, in fact. But if anything, the trend is actually over 60 years up. It's not true that climate change is causing our rainfall to fail. It might even be the opposite. Go back even longer than that, 120 years. Has Cambridge rainfall pattern in the winter really changed? The answer is no. It's very variable, yes, goes up and down like a yo-yo, but it's pretty constant. There are some very dry years back here in the 1970s and way back here in the 1930s. And back in the 1890s, even before this graph begins, there were bigger droughts. The big drought, so to speak, that we had over the last year or two was here. It's not anything other than normal, really. So where does that take us? Well, if we look at the groundwater abstraction, that's the next place to go. Because that winter rainfall that gets through is the source of our rivers and our springs, but it's also the source of the groundwater that we take, environmental support that we apply, and other uses for agriculture, commercial, and industrial purposes. The amount we take, I'll look at in a moment, but if you look at that pie chart, you will see that although our water for drinking is 62% of what's taken from the Cambridge chalk, there is also a huge thing called environmental support. And most people in Cambridge that I meet have no idea about this whatsoever. It is an enormous amount of water which is pumped back into the system to make it look as if what we did taking our drinking water made no difference. It actually rescues chalk streams which would die sooner without its help. This scheme was invented after the 70s droughts. I certainly remember the 1970s drought in Cambridge. It was quite severe. I know at the time that our wetland SSSIs began to dry up, and people like Max Walters, who were good colleagues of mine, were very distressed about it. We leaned very hard on the geologists and the water companies, and they came up with the ground support scheme. This scheme was supposed to do what it says there on the left in blue. The intention was to provide water so that there would be no damage to the environment. It was implemented, and by the late 90s it was running. Here it is. It runs from up near Chippenham and Newmarket down following what I think is probably the A505 down towards Royston. What is it? Well, there are 14 boreholes which can pump, and there are 28 spring outfalls which deliver water to streams that would die if they were allowed to. It's that sort of story. I can tell you that people like Rob Mungovan, who knows much more about chalk streams than I do, think that this is a fantastically good thing to do. But at the same time, it is, as it says on the bottom right there, robbing Peter to pay Paul. We are taking what is already a scarce resource and decreasing resource and using it to support our misdemeanors. So let's turn to river flow, because we can measure that and record it as well. And my big problem has been to try and understand this system so that one can know what to do about it. The granter are the Cam and the Ree. Granter, Cam and Ree. Those are the three streams which come from the chalk which has been abstracted from. If you look at those flows, they are recorded at flow weirs, and a lot of that data appears remotely monitored and is online, and you can see exactly what's going on. And if you add up all the flows, it took me a long time to do this, and get the means of those things over the years, going back to 1960, the Cam at Durnford shows a slight decrease in flow net. If you go down to a yearly basis, you can see this pattern more clearly. This is river flows per month plotted over a year. So if we just take 1 year here, from 2015 to 2016, this is starting off in July. If you can see my mouse in 2015, it goes up during the spring. Sorry, from July from July through the autumn, the flow goes up, and then it goes down during the summer, up during the winter, down during the summer. In some years, it doesn't get very high. And in fact, in a couple of years here, it doesn't even reach the mean river level once. Again, if you take the winter rainfall and try and correlate it with river flow, you get, again, quite a nice correlation. And if you follow this line down, you get to a point here at about 200 millimeters of winter rainfall. And if you get less than that, you don't get a river at all. One of the people who's contributed to Cam Valley Forum's data work is Bob Evans. Bob Evans works at Anglia Ruskin Sustainability Unit, and he could talk to you for hours about all this. But he says what you need to understand, Stephen, is the potential soil moisture deficit. If you go over those 2015-16 years again, from September through until the spring, the soil deficit of water goes up. And then it goes down during the spring and the summer, up during the winter and down again, like that every year. But you don't get any recharge of the aquifer until the soil has got all the water in it that it can take. And that is not happening in half the years at present. So it looks like there is too much water leaving our soil and not enough rain. It may be climate change is part of the picture. Hotter summers, certainly. Katie Marter here was the person who recorded the hottest day Britain has ever had in Cambridge, 38.7 Celsius on the 25th of July, 2019. So it looks as if there may be more evaporation from the plants taking more water out of the soil. I asked the author of the Stantec report, which Greater Cambridgeshire asked to be commissioned to find out about water resources, what the evapotranspiration changes had been in the past century, because I wanted to know whether this was an increasing problem. And she said to me, well, it's only about, because we are in a warmer world, it's only actually about 5% more. So this might be a factor, again, to take into consideration. I'm not saying I've got the answers, but these are the things that come to my mind. Just to put you in the picture about where we got to with doing something about all this, the River Granter in 2019 dried completely. There was from Ashton here a augmentation borehole pumping water all the time into the Cam at Linton. There were then the villages of Linton, Haslingfield, Abington and Babraham all adding their treated sewage to the flow, and at Stapleford the river was dry. Where did the water go? And the answer is all that water from those treated sewage works and that augmentation go back into the bed of the river. So here are your inconvenient truths. We do value our own drinking water supply. We all flush the loo. We all waste it. So we all need, I think, to own more of the responsibility for our water resources. It is our concern, and it should be our concern, and our water company needs to be responsive to us, and our government needs to be responsive to us. Our chalk streams are dying across the southeast of England. It may not be obvious here, but it's, I can tell you, much more obvious in the Chilterns. There will be greater droughts than those we've had recently in the future. We are not in a resilient position for facing that. There will be hotter summers, and therefore we need to be aware that recharge time is going to be less. And on top of all that, we have population increase for the Cambridge region, just when we feel we need greener environments and a better world to live in. Is it sustainable? How do we fix it? Well, Joe Stallard, who works in the engineering school and is a young postdoc, said he would like to model the system, and he's done that. And here we have the runoff in green and we have the chalk aquifer in the dark blue, which provides the river, and it provides the water supply, and it provides agriculture and industry, etc. Much of the water in this Sankey diagram is evaporated away, and what we have is a small fraction of the main remainder. So in a drought time, there may be nothing flowing from springs into the river at all, just water recycled from sewage treatment works. It's not a great picture. It's not always grim, but sometimes it leaves you wondering whether we've got it right. The Cam catchment's groundwater chalk upstream of Cambridge is supplying 22 Olympic swimming pools per day to 2 local water companies. Affinity Water is one. That water is going off to Essex, and most of it goes to Cambridge. The licensing for those abstractions is amazingly higher. So when the granter ran dry, I went to the Cambridge Water Company with Bob Evans and said, hey, the rivers are dry. Why are you not asking people to turn off their taps? And they said, well, it's very simple, Stephen. We are taking no more water than we've been taking for a long time, which is true. And we are taking much less than we are licensed to take. The red line is the license, and the actual is in the blue. So they're being good boys in the Cambridge Water Company. They're not breaking any rules at all. The Environment Agency, the Environment Agency occasionally remind them that the groundwater is rather low in SSSIs and that they mustn't take any more, please, or you'll be in trouble with the Natural England. But those licenses set at that very high level have been unaltered since 1960. It's a totally fossilized control system of what should be sustainable development. So there are lots of solutions to this, and I won't be able to spend much time on all of them tonight because we don't have the time. But let me just go through quickly where we are. Katie Thornborough, I take my hat off to this lady, many of you will know her. She not only initiated some of the steps in the climate strategy and the climate crisis that the city says we now have to cope with, but she also convened a water forum in November 2019, at which I was present. And at that meeting, I spoke, and someone came from the Environment Agency. And for the first time, a confession was made. We have over-licensed, and there is no water left. Our groundwater model, says the Environment Agency now, suggests reductions in overall abstraction in the Cam catchment of 60 to 70% would be necessary to meet environmental flow targets and hence contribute towards achieving good ecological status under the Water Framework Directive. Oh gosh. And then they say in the bottom paragraph on the page, but it'll cost you because this is what we've said that the water companies can have. Oh gosh, what do we do? Well, the truth of the matter is that chalk has a reservoir of water in it, which we could rely on for the river. Chalk streams should run all year and every year, whatever the weather. Abstraction has pushed it further and further into being a smaller resource. Did you notice that that licensing wasn't based on how much water there is? It was based on a fossilized license. The Stantec report, which was commissioned by the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership, concluded, similarly, there is no capacity to increase groundwater abstraction from the chalk. And I am gratified that that has been said to our local government. We cannot go on as we are if you want to have streams that run naturally. Recently, I looked up a paper that Joe Stallard found for me on water supply of Cambridgeshire, dating from the 1920s. And in there are measurements with a bucket from Melbourne Springs, Shepworth Springs, and Thriplow Springs 100 years ago. And Shepworth Springs were producing in March then 4,400,000 gallons a day. That is a big flow. In 1920, the Shep had 14 cubic meters of water per minute. And that is a great deal of water. And those three little springs which feed those villages with their water probably were producing then what the whole Ree is producing now. Just to give you a little bit of travel, here's my Australian family squatting beside an Australian Aboriginal waterhole. In Australia, the Aboriginal people regarded water as a shared resource. Nobody owned it. It was there for all them and all the animals, etc. And the Europeans arrived. First, they disgraced themselves frequently by removing all the water they could find from these holes, which are thousands of years old, many thousands of years old. 10, 20,000 years they've been used by local people. So, you know, this sort of thing makes me realize that we need some thinking which will change things. Groundwater is a common, okay? You can think about it as a common. And Garrett Hardin, the ecologist, many years ago, wrote about the tragedy of the commons. And what he envisaged there was a scenario in which individual people had the freedom to increase the stocking rate. If you increase your stocking and your neighbor doesn't, then you do better than them. But the grass which you're eating, of course, may suffer. That's overgrazing. So often on our commons these days, we have fixed stocking rates. But if our groundwater is a commons and we take more than we should, we get lovely water. We are the rich man, the winner. But the river, the wildlife of the chalk streams are the losers. And they don't have a voice unless we give them one. Now, you don't have to think about water in that way. There are other ways. Partha Dasgupta has recently produced a report, which some of you may have seen and read about. And it says that we've got to bring the value of natural capital into our economic system. I don't like this myself. I prefer to think about ecosystem services at the most. But if you're going to put a money value on things, then we jolly well need to go back to government and off what and tell them what for. And that's what Cam Valley Forum has done with a request from Ofwat for information about how we think the water companies should be run. And that's what we said at the top there. This thing is very valuable for us, this chalk stream, for recreational, cultural, educational value. It has a huge value. And therefore, this needs to be part of the equation. And if the Cambridge Water Company are going to have to be paid off and made to get their water from somewhere else, hopefully, then you've got to pay. This is a value that we value, and we want to keep it, please, within our economic thinking. David King, who you will know as someone who has been leading the charge on climate change, said to a meeting of Natural Cambridgeshire a few months ago, if you're considering any kind of development in Cambridge, the prime consideration is to ensure that you have environmental well-being. If you wreck the ecosystem, you aren't going to do anything useful. Okay, so what can we do? Well, the leakage is in our old water supply delivery system is not great. I mean, I feel really sorry for the Cambridge Water Company because they're trying like anything to get this right. But we have 23% leakage from abstraction to delivery. Not great. Cambridge Water Company recently stated by 2024-25, we will reduce total leakage on our network by 15% from 2019-20 levels. Okay, so in 3 years' time, we might have saved 2 megalitres. Well, that's only one Olympic swimming pool, really, per day. So we do need to do something more about leakage. It could be done. And if it was totally tackled, it would probably make water more available to more developments. There is a little problem. The right-hand map, which was the chalk map I showed you before, here is where the water comes from. It's this area here on the left-hand map, if you can see my mouse. And this is the supply area of the Cambridge Water Company, up to Ramsey, down to Haverhill, off to Royston and Gamlingay. So that's really where we are. Finally, water saving is something we can do. That's a pie chart which shows you roughly how you can save water. I'm skipping through now, so as fast as I can. The Cambridge Water Company runs its own water saving advices. Cam Valley Forum has its water saving advices as well on its webpage, so you can look at those. Lots of good ideas if you need them. People need to care more about water. That's undoubtedly something that we need to try and instill in people. Finally, the key question I think I would put to you is this: who tells you to save water? Once in about 20 years, Cambridge Water Company has a hosepipe ban. If you go to a place like Cape Town, that control is not the water company, it's the local government. So in Cambridge, local government has little or no say about these things. It's assumed that it's right. There are several other things we can do. I think the big one to draw your attention to is the building regulations. We could insist that buildings have tighter regulations on water saving. We could have appliances that were better. We could have compulsory metering. That would be a very, very big gain. My real final plea is this: none of these can meet the existing unsustainability of present practice. And finally, increased demand is by any ecological measure unsustainable. I must stop there because I've run for a long time. Sue, time